I stood at the doorstep of the house I had spent my entire childhood in, staring at the chipped wood, my fingers gripping the handle of my suitcase so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I already knew what the message would say. I didn't need to read it, but I pulled it out anyway, just to see the words one more time. "You can't stay here anymore. You're an adult now. It's time you figure things out on your own." My mother's name sat at the top of the screen. It didn't feel real. My body was frozen, my breath shallow, my mind cycling through 100 different versions of how this moment could have played out. In none of them did my own mother lock me out of my home. In none of them did I have to choose between being homeless and crawling back to a family that never really wanted me there. I could still hear Jeff's voice from the last time we spoke. "I knew you'd turn into a burden. It was only a matter of time." He was standing in the doorway that day, his large frame blocking the entrance, his face twisted into the smug, self-satisfied grin he always wore when he knew he'd won. "She's your daughter," he had said to my mother, his tone dripping with feigned concern, "but you can't let her leech off of you forever." And my mother, without hesitation, without even a glance in my direction, nodded. That was 2 weeks ago. I had been packing my things in secret since then, stuffing my most important belongings into my school backpack, slowly moving boxes into a friend's garage. But the moment was finally here, and I wasn't ready for it. I reached out and knocked, a single, weak knock. My fingers hovered over the wood, trembling, my chest tightening with something between rage and fear. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe a final chance. Maybe some sign that my mother still cared. I heard footsteps, the sound of locks turning. The door cracked open just enough for me to see Jeff's face. He leaned against the doorframe like he had all the time in the world. "What do you want?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I need to talk to my mom." Jeff sighed dramatically and shook his head. "Lena, we've been over this. It's not my decision. She made the call." I tried to look past him, to see inside, but he shifted slightly, blocking my view. "Let me talk to her." "She's resting," he said, dragging out the words as if I were a child who didn't understand simple instructions. "You know, this stress hasn't been good for her. The last thing she needs is more of your drama." My fingers dug into my palm. "Just let me in." Jeff let out a short, cruel laugh. "You're not hearing me, kid. This isn't your home anymore." The words landed like a punch to the gut. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream at him, shove him aside, demand to see my mother. But deep down, I already knew how this would end. I took a slow step back, forcing myself to keep my face blank. If I showed any weakness, he would eat it up like he always did. "Fine," I said, turning on my heel. "Good girl," Jeff called after me. "See? That wasn't so hard." I kept walking. One step, another. I told myself I wouldn't cry. But as soon as I turned the corner, my vision blurred. I pulled out my phone again, my fingers hovering over my contacts. I had no idea where to go. The one place that was supposed to be my safety net had just been yanked away. I thought about calling my best friend, but I knew she was already dealing with her own problems. I had no money for a motel. I couldn't afford an apartment. I had nothing. For the first time in my life, I realized that I was completely, utterly alone. The cold wind bit at my skin as I walked down the street, my suitcase rattling behind me on uneven pavement. My mind was blank and racing at the same time, cycling through every option, every possibility, but all roads led to the same place. I had nowhere to go. I could call Sarah, but she lived with her parents, and her mom had made it clear years ago that I wasn't welcome to stay over. I could go to a shelter, but the idea of being surrounded by strangers in an unfamiliar place sent a wave of panic through my chest. I could go back. I could beg. I clenched my jaw and shook that last thought out of my head. No, that was what Jeff wanted, to see me crawl back desperate, just so he could slam the door in my face again. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I kept walking until my legs ached, passing closed storefronts and dimly lit apartment complexes, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle in my bones. I had been up since dawn, dreading this moment, but now that it was here, it didn't feel real. My mother had actually let this happen. She had chosen him, over me. But had she ever really chosen me? I sat down on the edge of a bus stop bench, wrapping my arms around myself as I exhaled, my breath visible in the cold air. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a brief, stupid second, my heart leapt, thinking it was her. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she realized what she had done. But when I pulled it out, I saw a different name on the screen. Sarah. I answered immediately, trying to steady my voice. Hey, where are you? Her tone was sharp, urgent. I hesitated. Nowhere. Lena. Don't start. I just saw your text. What do you mean they kicked you out? I swallowed hard. Exactly what it sounds like. Jesus Christ, she muttered. There was a pause, then a sigh. Okay, look, I talked to Ben, and you can crash on our couch for a few nights. It's not much, but it's something. Relief flooded through me so fast that I almost felt dizzy. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. Where are you? I gave her the street name and sat in silence for a while after she hung up, gripping my phone like a lifeline. It wasn't a real solution, but it was better than nothing. By the time I got to Sarah's apartment, my fingers were numb, my legs aching from walking in the cold for so long. She opened the door before I even knocked, pulling me inside. You look like hell, she said, leading me to the couch. Sit. I'll get you some tea or something. Ben was sitting at the kitchen table, looking at me with a mixture of concern and awkwardness. We weren't exactly close. He was Sarah's roommate, and we'd only spoken a handful of times, but he gave me a small nod. You can stay as long as you need, he said. Just, don't burn the place down or anything. I let out a weak, breathless laugh. I'll try my best. Sarah came back with a steaming mug and handed it to me before sitting down next to me. Okay, she said, tucking her legs under her. What the hell happened? I stared into the tea, watching the steam rise. Jeff finally got what he wanted, I said, my voice flat. He convinced my mom to kick me out. Sarah's expression darkened. I knew he was a piece of shit, but I didn't think she'd actually go through with it. Neither did I. There was a silence between us, thick and heavy. Sarah had been my best friend since middle school. She had seen everything, the way Jeff treated me, the way my mother ignored it, the way I spent years trying to convince myself that things would get better. She had been the one person who had always believed me when I said that he was dangerous, that he was controlling, that he was slowly destroying every piece of my mother until there was nothing left of the woman she used to be. So what now? She asked gently. I forced a shrug. I don't know. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. Lena, you have to report this. Your mom, she can't just throw you out like that. I let out a humorless laugh. She can, and she did. There's nothing I can do. You're not just gonna give up, are you? What do you want me to do, Sarah? I snapped, the exhaustion catching up to me all at once. Call the cops and tell them my mom loves her husband more than me? That's not illegal. Sarah flinched but didn't look away. I just don't want you to let them win. I sighed, pressing my fingers against my temples. They already did. That night, I lay awake on the couch staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the city outside the window. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jeff's face, heard his voice. This isn't your home anymore. I thought about my mother, about whether she was lying in bed, thinking about me, regretting what she had done, or if she was curled up next to him, pretending I never existed. I already knew the answer. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket tighter around me. I had nowhere to go, no plan, no idea what came next. But I knew one thing. I was never going back. The first morning, waking up in Sarah's apartment felt unreal. The couch was stiff, my body sore from sleeping in a curled position all night. But it was the quiet that unsettled me the most. No sounds of Jeff stomping around the house, no forced whispers between him and my mom in the kitchen, no passive-aggressive remarks tossed in my direction, just silence. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells. Sarah was already up, sitting at the small dining table with her laptop open, typing furiously. She glanced up when I shifted under the blanket. Morning, she said, pushing a steaming cup of coffee toward me. I sat up slowly, stretching my stiff limbs before taking the cup. Thanks. She nodded, but didn't go back to typing. Instead, she just watched me, a crease forming between her brows. Are you okay? I took a slow sip, letting the heat settle in my chest before answering. I don't know. Feels weird. Not being in that house? Yeah. Sarah leaned back in her chair. That's not a bad thing, Lena. I knew she was right, but the truth was, I didn't know who I was outside of that house, outside of the role I had been forced into, Jeff's inconvenience, my mother's afterthought. For years, survival had been my only priority. I had learned to keep my head down, to avoid confrontation, to disappear when I needed to. But now, for the first time, I didn't have to do any of that. And I had no idea what came next. Sarah cleared her throat. So, I was thinking, you need a job. I blinked at her. I have a job. You work 10 hours a week at a coffee shop, Lena. That's not a job, that's pocket change. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. I know, You don't have a choice. She was right again. I had never needed money before. Jeff made sure I never had access to any. My mom controlled my bank account until I turned 18, but by then Jeff had convinced her to charge me rent for living in my own house. I had spent the last year barely scraping by, working a few shifts at a small cafe, saving whatever I could while still handing over most of my paycheck to them. And now, I had nothing. Sarah reached over and flipped her laptop toward me. I already found a few places hiring. Retail, mostly. Not great, but better than nothing. I scrolled through the listings, feeling a familiar heaviness settle in my chest. I had never planned for this. I had never expected to be on my own so soon. Sarah must have sensed my hesitation because she sighed, closing her laptop. Look, I know this sucks, but you can't sit here and mope forever. You need money. You need a plan. And most importantly, you need to get as far away from those two as possible. She didn't have to say their names. I knew exactly who she meant. I nodded slowly. Okay. Yeah, I'll start applying today. Sarah studied me for a moment before nodding in approval. Good. And you're staying here until you figure things out, so don't even think about running off somewhere else, got it? I let out a small, tired smile. Got it. The rest of the day felt like a blur. I filled out application after application, my fingers sore from typing. Ben even helped, printing out copies of my resume and giving me pointers on how to sound more confident in my emails. I appreciated it, even though part of me still struggled to accept their help. By evening, I had applied to 7 places. Nothing fancy, but anything that would get me a paycheck fast. The thought of working long hours in a store, dealing with rude customers, exhausted me before I even got a call back. But I didn't have the luxury of being picky. Sarah came home late from work, tossing her bag onto the counter. Any luck? Maybe. I applied to a bunch of places, just waiting to hear back. Good. Now, next step. She paused, hesitating. I narrowed my eyes. What? You need to talk to your mom. I felt my stomach drop. No. Lena. No, I'm not doing this with you, Sarah. I already know what she's gonna say. She's gonna defend him. She's gonna pretend like this is normal, like I deserve it. I'm done. Sarah exhaled, running a hand through her hair. I get it. But you need closure. You need to say whatever it is you never got to say. I clenched my jaw. She doesn't deserve to hear it. Maybe not, but you deserve to say it. I hated how easily she could break through my defenses. I had spent years swallowing my anger, burying my resentment deep enough that even I couldn't reach it most days. But now, for the first time, I didn't have to keep my mouth shut. I glanced at my phone, at my mother's contact, my thumb hovering over the call button. I'll think about it, I muttered. Sarah seemed satisfied enough with that answer. Okay, just don't wait too long. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Jeff's voice. I saw my mother's blank expression as she let him win. I felt the weight of every moment. I had been too afraid to stand up for myself. I grabbed my phone before I could change my mind and tapped the call button. It rang 3 times before she answered. Lena? Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she had the right to say my name anymore. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah. It's me. There was a pause. Is everything okay? I almost laughed. The absurdity of that question made my chest tighten with something between rage and heartbreak. Seriously? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. You kicked me out, Mom. You didn't even fight for me. You let him win. Silence. Then, finally, it wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She hesitated. Jeff just thinks. I don't care what Jeff thinks, I snapped. I care about what you think, but I guess that doesn't matter, does it? She sighed. I didn't have a choice, Lena. Yes, you did, you just didn't pick me. Another pause. Then softly, I'm sorry. The words should have meant something, they should have fixed something, but they didn't. I closed my eyes, inhaling shakily. Yeah, me too. And then I hung up. I didn't cry after I hung up. I thought I would. I thought the weight of everything I had been holding in for years would finally crack open, that I would break down in some dramatic, cinematic way. But instead I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hands, feeling absolutely nothing. I had spent my whole life waiting for my mother to prove me wrong, to show me that she wasn't as weak as I feared she was, that when the time came she would stand up for me, that she would choose me. And now, after hearing her voice, after listening to her pathetic excuses, I knew the truth. She never would. Sarah must have heard the call end because she peeked her head out of her bedroom, watching me cautiously. How'd it go? I let out a breath, placing the phone face down on the coffee table. She said she didn't have a choice. Sarah rolled her eyes, walking over and sitting on the edge of the couch. That's such bullshit. I know. You okay? I wanted to tell her yes, that I was fine, that this was exactly what I had expected, but the words felt too heavy in my mouth. I had spent years pretending to be okay. I was exhausted. I don't know, I admitted. Sarah exhaled, running a hand through her hair. I know this doesn't make it better, but you did the right thing, calling her, saying what you needed to say. Did I? I laughed bitterly, because it feels like I just wasted my time, like nothing changed. Sarah looked at me, her eyes soft with something close to sympathy. But it did change. You didn't back down this time. You finally said it out loud. And now, you don't have to wonder what if anymore. I hated that she was right, but that was the thing about Sarah. She was always right. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I drifted in and out, my body exhausted but my mind racing, picking apart every second of that phone call, every pause, every hesitation in my mother's voice. I wondered if she cried after I hung up. I wondered if she regretted anything. I wondered if she even cared at all. By morning, I decided that it didn't matter. I had a job interview that afternoon at a small clothing store in the city, the kind of place that sold overpriced vintage jackets to teenagers who wanted to look effortlessly cool. It wasn't the worst place in the world to work, and the manager, a woman in her mid-30s with cropped blonde hair and tired eyes, seemed more concerned with whether or not I could fold jeans properly than my lack of retail experience. You available to start this week? She asked, scanning my application. I nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. Good, you're hired. Minimum wage, but you get discounts on merch, and if you last more than a month, I'll start giving you better shifts. Thank you, I said, the relief washing over me so fast that I almost felt lightheaded. I had a job, a real one. I wasn't sure if I wanted to laugh or cry. That night, Sarah and Ben insisted on celebrating. It was nothing fancy, just pizza and cheap beer in their tiny apartment, but it was the first time in weeks that I felt something close to normal. You're officially a functioning member of society, Ben said, raising his beer in a mock toast. Welcome to the grind, kid. Sarah smirked. Ignore him, we're proud of you. I took a sip of my drink, letting their words settle in my chest. I wasn't sure if I believed them yet, but I wanted to. After they went to bed, I sat alone on the couch, staring out the window at the city lights. I had a job, I had a place to stay. For the first time in my life, I was in control of what happened next. So why did it still feel like I was waiting for something to go wrong? I reached for my phone before I could stop myself, scrolling through my messages. There was nothing from my mother, of course. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, maybe some proof that she was thinking about me, that she missed me, that she felt something. But there was nothing. I locked my phone and set it aside, exhaling slowly. I had spent my whole life waiting for my mother to save me. It was time to save myself. The first few weeks at my new job were exhausting. Retail was its own kind of hell. long hours on my feet, dealing with customers who treated me like I was invisible, folding the same pile of clothes over and over again because people couldn't be bothered to put things back. But I didn't complain. I couldn't. I needed this job more than I needed my pride. Sarah and Ben were kind enough to let me stay as long as I needed, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. Their apartment was small, and no matter how much they insisted they didn't mind, I could feel the weight of my presence. I needed my own place, my own life, but rent was expensive, and even with my new job, I wasn't making enough to afford anything close to decent. So I worked. I picked up extra shifts whenever I could. I skipped meals to save money. I counted every dollar, every tip, every possible way I could stretch my paycheck. Some nights, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, doing the math in my head, trying to figure out how long it would take before I could get out of here. The worst part was the waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for Jeff to show up at my work, smug and condescending, just to remind me that I'd never really be free of him, waiting for my mother to call, to send a message, anything, but she didn't. Weeks passed and she never reached out. I should have been used to it by now. One evening, after a grueling double shift, I got home to find Sarah sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in, her face unreadable. "You need to see this," she said, holding out her phone.
I took it hesitantly, my heart already pounding before I even looked at the screen. It was a Facebook post. Jeff Harrington. Some people are so ungrateful. You give them a roof, food, a life, and they spit in your face. Some people don't deserve second chances. I guess they'll learn that the hard way.
The comments were filled with sympathy, people agreeing, saying things like, "You did all you could, man," and some people are just lost causes. I felt sick. "It's about you," Sarah said quietly. "Of course it is." I handed the phone back, rubbing a hand over my face. He's making himself the victim, acting like I was some parasite he had to get rid of. Are you surprised? No, I wasn't. Jeff was always good at twisting reality, at making himself look like the wounded party. He had been doing it for years. I shouldn't have cared. I shouldn't have let it get to me, but it did, because my mother had liked the post. I stared at the screen at the little thumbs up icon next to her name, and something inside me cracked. She hadn't just let him kick me out. She was letting him rewrite history, letting him tell the world that I was the problem, that I had somehow deserved this. Sarah must have seen the look on my face because she reached out, squeezing my arm. "You don't have to read that garbage." I pulled away, shaking my head. "No, it's fine. Let them say whatever they want." "Lena, I don't care," I lied. "It doesn't matter." I went to my room before she could argue. But I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every awful thing Jeff had ever said to me. Every time he called me a burden. Every time my mother stood there and let it happen. Every time I told myself it would get better. I didn't know what hurt more, being kicked out or realizing that she was completely okay with erasing me from her life. The next morning I woke up to another message, this time from an unknown number. "You're pathetic." No name, no context, just those two words. I deleted it immediately, my fingers shaking as I shoved my phone into my pocket. I already knew who it was from. Jeff had never been the type to let go of control easily. I got through my shift in a daze, my mind elsewhere, my hands moving on autopilot. Fold, hang, smile at the customers, pretend everything was fine. But when I got back to the apartment, Sarah was waiting for me again, her expression serious. "Lena," she said slowly, carefully, "I think you should block your mom." I froze. "What?" She hesitated. "She's never going to change, you know that, right? She's just going to keep hurting you." I felt my throat tighten. "She hasn't even tried to contact me." "Exactly." I looked away. "It's not that easy." "I know, but you have to start putting yourself first." I wanted to argue, to tell her that cutting my mother out of my life completely was impossible, that no matter how much she had hurt me, she was still my mom. But wasn't that the same excuse I had been using my entire life? "She's still my mom."
As if that made any of it okay.
I didn't block her that night or the next, but I stopped checking, stopped waiting, stopped searching for signs that she would change. Because Sarah was right. She never would. I stopped checking my phone for messages from my mother. At first, it was hard. Every morning, my first instinct was to unlock the screen, scroll through my notifications, and see if maybe, just maybe, she had reached out. But she never did. And after a while, I stopped expecting her to. I forced myself to focus on what was in front of me: work, saving money, finding a way to move forward instead of clinging to a past that was never going to change. The routine became a kind of comfort. I woke up early, worked my shifts at the store, came home exhausted, and crashed on the couch until I had to do it all over again. It wasn't much of a life, but at least it was mine. I didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't have to tiptoe around the house wondering what mood Jeff would be in. I didn't have to wait for my mother to remember I existed. And yet, no matter how much I told myself that this was better, that I was finally free, there was still a dull ache in the back of my mind, a quiet, nagging thought that I didn't want to acknowledge. I missed her. Not the version of her that she had become, but the mother I used to believe in, the one who used to make my favorite pancakes on Sunday mornings when I was little, the one who sang along to the radio in the car, badly and off-key, making me laugh until my stomach hurt, the one who for a long time had been my whole world. I didn't know when that version of her had disappeared. Maybe she had been fading for years, and I had just refused to see it. One evening, after a long shift, I walked home with Sarah. The sun had already set and the streetlights flickered against the pavement. The cold air bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. I was too lost in my thoughts. "You're quiet," Sarah said, glancing at me. "Just tired," I muttered. She didn't believe me. I could tell by the way she tilted her head slightly, the way she studied me with that sharp, knowing gaze of hers. "Lena, you don't have to pretend with me." I exhaled, shoving my hands deeper into my jacket pockets. "I don't know. I guess I just keep thinking about her, about how easy it was for her to just forget about me." Sarah was silent for a moment before she said, "Maybe she didn't forget. Maybe she's just not strong enough to face what she did." I frowned. That doesn't make it better. I know, but sometimes people would rather live in denial than admit they've screwed up. I didn't respond. We walked the rest of the way in silence, the only sounds coming from the occasional car passing by. When we reached the apartment, Sarah hesitated before unlocking the door. "You know," she said, "if she ever does call, you don't owe her anything." I nodded, but I wasn't sure if I believed it. The next day was just like every other. I went to work, folded clothes, smiled at customers, counted the minutes until my shift was over. But then, just as I was about to clock out, my phone rang. An unknown number. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something in me, some old habit that I hadn't quite shaken, made me swipe to answer. "Hello?" A pause. Then, "Lena?" I felt my breath hitch. I hadn't heard that voice in weeks, but I recognized it instantly. "Ma?" Another pause, then a breathless, shaky exhale. "I need your help." I went numb. For a second, I thought I had misheard her, that my brain was playing some kind of cruel trick on me. But no, it was real. She had actually said those words. I turned away from the store's front counter, lowering my voice. "What do you mean?" "It's Jeff," she said, and I heard the tremor in her voice. "He's gone. He took everything. I don't know what to do." I didn't respond. I just stood there, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Jeff is gone. For years, I had fantasized about this moment, about what it would feel like if he ever disappeared from our lives. I thought it would feel like relief, like justice. But now that it was real, all I felt was a strange hollowness. "Okay," I said finally. "Okay?" She sounded confused, like she had expected something else. "What do you want me to do about it?" The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then, softly, "I don't have anywhere to go, Lena." I closed my eyes. I had spent my whole life waiting for my mother to prove me wrong, to show me that she wasn't as weak as I feared she was, that when the time came she would stand up for me, that she would choose me. And now, after hearing her voice, after listening to her pathetic excuses, I knew the truth. She never would. I'm sorry that happened, I said, my voice flat, but I can't help you. Lee, you didn't fight for me, Mom. You let him throw me away like I was nothing, and now you expect me to save you? Her breath hitched. I wasn't strong enough. Neither was I whispered.
She made a small broken sound. Please.
I wanted to care. I wanted to feel something other than this cold, empty detachment, but I had nothing left to give her. I hope you figure things out, I said finally. I really do, but I'm not the person you call when things fall apart anymore. And then, before she could respond, I hung up. I stared at my phone, my heart hammering in my chest. I had just done the one thing I had spent my entire life convincing myself I could never do. I had chosen myself. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for years suddenly felt lighter. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me. She didn't even have to ask, she must have seen it on my face. He called, I said, sinking onto the couch. And Jeff laughed, took everything. Now she wants me to help her. Sarah raised an eyebrow. And what did you say? I exhaled, a slow, steady breath. I told her no. A small, proud smile pulled at the corners of Sarah's lips. Good. I let out a quiet, breathless laugh. Yeah, I think it was. I expected to feel guilty, but I didn't. For the first time in my life, I felt free. The next morning felt different, lighter, like I had been carrying something on my back for so long that I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. I didn't check my phone for any follow-up messages. I didn't replay the conversation over and over in my head, wondering if I should have said something different. I didn't let myself feel guilty. I had spent my whole life twisting myself into knots, trying to be someone my mother would finally choose, but no matter how much I tried, it was never enough. I was never enough. And maybe I had spent too long blaming myself for that. Maybe I had wasted too much time thinking I was the problem. Sarah had already left for work by the time I got up, but she had left a note on the counter. Proud of you. Let's get drinks tonight, my treat. I smiled, folding the note and tucking it into my pocket before heading to work. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't counting down the minutes until my shift was over. I wasn't distracted by thoughts of my mother, of Jeff, of the life I had been forced to leave behind. I was just here, present, living my life. It wasn't much, but it was mine. At the end of my shift, I checked my bank account. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. Enough for a deposit on a small place, enough to start looking, enough to finally stop feeling like I was waiting for something to change. That night, Sarah and I sat at a small bar down the street, sipping cheap cocktails and talking about everything except my mother. For once, I didn't want to think about her. I didn't want to waste another second of my life waiting for a woman who had made it clear she wasn't waiting for me. So, Sarah said, stirring the ice in her glass, what's next? I thought about it for a moment. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have an answer. I don't know, I admitted. Sarah grinned. Good. That means you can do anything. I let the words settle in my chest. She was right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trapped. I wasn't tied to my past.